I stumbled unaware on the keeper of my soul. In the brilliance of aurora, I could see the promises of deity. Like a soul, my soul, aflame, I saw her aura, the beauty of 1,000 lifetimes, all surpassed in that one moment.
Before Sebastian, Zacharias, and Estoliana came to the island, there were two distinct equine phenotypes: large draft horses with gentle, inquisitive natures, mostly living in the forest on the large island, and miniature horses were thriving on Corlia. The sinking of the Anka moon brought 6 pregnant mares to the island, mostly Iberian riding animals. Sebastian brought with him several hot-blooded Anatolian animals, high-strung and light-boned. Sebastian also brought his Palmyran stallion Migo. As these animals interbred, the Andestolian came into being, a warm-blooded horse with an exceptional gait, flexibility, and a way of bonding with humans that made them a joy to work with. Melanie Zakarian and Scrito.
The next day, Leorana and Shania bathed together. After, Anadora checked Shania's bandaged ankles and pronounced herself satisfied with the way they were healing. Leorana was reminded of earlier days, when her father was alive and she was surrounded by both love and wealth. Watching Anadora fussing over Shania gave Leorana the same feeling of security she had as a child. She remembered earlier years when she and Shania would share a bath, giggling and laughing and enjoying the warm water. They were such a contrast, with Shania's wiry petite body and small breasts, dark brown skin and pure black hair, compared with Leorana's taller body, generous curves, blonde hair and pale complexion. From the time her father bought the young Shania for her daughter, they were inseparable. For Leorana, it was wonderful to see Anadora fussing over Shania. They both were enjoying themselves. When they were finally ready, Anadora sent the young woman who was helping her, and helping with translation, out of the room.
I must ask,
she said to Leorana, her accent thick but understandable.
If you could choose, would you accept Antiochus?
As?
Leorana asked. Anadora frowned at the two women, confused. Finally, her expression cleared.
His Kaylee, keeper of his soul, mother of his children. You would say yes?
Leorana blushed. From the time he saved her life, she was obsessed by the thought of Antiochus as her husband. She couldn't respond. Apparently, her non-response was clear enough for Anadora. She turned her attention to Shania.
Shania, if Tremaine asked this?
She prompted.
Leorana determines my destiny,
Shania said, looking at Leorana with her eyes pleading.
You are in charge of your own destiny,
Leorana said. Seeing the rejection of that thought in her friend's eyes, she added,
but I want you to accept Tremaine.
Shania wanted him. Perhaps she needed it to be Leorana's command. Anadora seemed to take that as confirmation enough.
My sons, they wish to make you theirs. You must understand about Estolia before this evening.
She looked from Shania to Leorana.
They will seduce you. Tonight. Decide now if you will accept them. If you accept, you agree to be theirs, forever.
Leorana felt a rush of warmth at the thought.
Would that make one of us the future queen?
Anadora was the one who blushed. Leorana felt a sinking in the pit of her stomach. Did she have it wrong? Did she misinterpret everything? Was this woman asking them if they would become mere concubines to the twin brothers? Anadora finally spoke.
Antiochus will be king. If you accept him, you will be queen.
Leorana flushed and looked away from the queen. She met Shania's eyes, seeing the knowledge within.
And Shania?
She asked.
Both my sons need wives?
Anadora said.
We would accept nothing less,
Shania said.
I wished you to know their hearts.
Anadora smiled softly before adding with a chuckle.
The men of Estolia believe that, if they choose a woman to be their Kaylee, deity will make it work out right.
Tremaine looked at his brother and it occurred to him that they would never be closer than they were at this moment. Their days of togetherness were at an end. He never really realized when they turned 30 and found the keepers of their respective souls, they would also leave behind the companionship of 30 years of life. Antiochus, in that moment, was the true older brother as he smiled at Tremaine.
Brother, we will always be together. We will rule the nation together. Our sons will be born within a week of one another. We will live together in the grand palace. The only thing we will not do is share a room as we have done before now.
Antiochus was correct. They each had their future roles shaped by deity and inheritance. They had the joy of knowing that they would both fulfill their most sacred obligations to the citizens of Estolia. The transition between Capitolos would go smoothly, and Estolia would continue secure in the promises of deity. Now it was the time for the identical brothers to reap the blessings that came with their willingness to serve. They were ready to leave the room they shared when the door opened and their father and Uncle Rialto slipped inside. Rialto had a solemn expression on his face.
Before we go to the festivities, it is important you, Tremaine, are willing to take upon yourself the office of last resort.
For a minute, Tremaine remembered the sick sense of realization when he first saw the dagger. He glanced over at his brother. He would be his brother's last resort, his first consul, and most importantly, he would become keeper. Lifting his chin, he inclined his head in agreement, meeting his uncle's eyes.
Antiochus,
Rialto said,
will you accept Tremaine Antimonius, descendant of Zacharian, as your last resort?
Antiochus looked over at Tremaine with pure love, and Tremaine felt as if his heart would burst with the emotions, the love contained inside him.
I, Antiochus Tiberius, accept my brother Tremaine and place before him the solemn task to become the heir to the throne as a last resort should illness or iniquity render me incapable of fulfilling my duties.
Rolando stepped forward and said solemnly,
Hold your hands like so.
He held both hands palms upwards at shoulder height, touching slightly. Antiochus held his hands in the required arrangement. Rialto walked over to Antiochus and set the dagger on his palms. Turning to Tremaine, he nodded to himself as if agreeing with an inner dialogue.
As keeper of the collective souls of Estolia, I ask if you, Tremaine Antimonius, are willing to take on the burden of being the last resort, he who stands ready to lead the nation if illness or iniquity should take your brother and render him incapable of being the king of Estolia.
Tremaine felt the swirling force of the power bestowed upon him. He was willing to do whatever was necessary to see their nation into the future. He switched his attention from his brother to his uncle and then to his father, wearing the crown, happily caring for the nation.
I am willing,
he said solemnly. Rialto approached him with a sash different from any he had seen before. The black dye made the fabric distinctive, like a moonless, starless night, a work of art worthy of the dagger. Tremaine held his arms to the side so his uncle could pin the sash at his shoulder and hip. When Rialto stepped back, Tremaine felt the fabric briefly. It was time he finally touched the deadly dagger. He approached his brother and reached for it, marveling anew at the workmanship that went into it, at the feeling of the gems embedded in the handle, at the weight and the feel of deity permeating its creation. He ran his fingertip over the inscription in the old Estolian writing, admonishing him to keep the promise. Finally, his attention returned to the three men in the room. He held the dagger aloft and said,
I take this dagger, that I might always be prepared to keep the promise of Zacharias, with the same solemnity that I will keep the soul of Estolia.
The brother's eyes met for a moment before he slipped the dagger into the sheath, holding it over his heart. Once his hands dropped to his sides, he felt the sense of the office he held, as if he'd donned more than a simple sash. It felt as if he had stepped into a new skin and was a new man.
There are two beautiful young women waiting in the ballroom,
Rolando said, his laughter lightening the mood in the room tremendously.
Let us not waste the evening.
When with my body to her wed, the exquisite pleasure of that virgin marriage bed could none compare. The stark cessation